first thing I will say is that there isn't a single transgender person I've ever met who didn't want to be not transgender.
Hi there, my name's Chrissy. I'm 61. I'm trans femme, trans woman, and have been trans all my conscious life. For my first memories, really school age memories, of only having female friends, of not being able to relate to boys. But I think in those days we didn't know, there was no language for trans identity, so I didn't know what was wrong with me. At the age of 16, 17, I ran away from home, moved to London and ended up in the drug culture. And the drug use was really to deal with the pain, the brokenness inside of me of not knowing what was wrong. And after 4 or 5 years, I ended up in India as an opium addict. Yeah, that was the end of the road, because I really was very, very close to death.
I didn't always know I was a male. I didn't know what was wrong. I always wondered why I didn't fit in with females. I didn't understand them. But I didn't know that I was male. Because there was no such thing, you couldn't identify to it because you didn't know anything about it. Neither did your parents. I always wondered why I never grew a penis. It was something that I always expected as a child to develop as I grew older. It didn't. And I always thought that was a bit strange. It was when my mother said, well, you're female, that I had some kind of rebellion against it. I couldn't understand what she was trying to ask me to do. It's like living in something that's not you. You try and cope with it. It's like a skin. It's like something that you don't connect with. And you get up every morning and just go, who the hell's this? I remember when my breasts started growing, I hated it. I used to put safety pins through my nipples. I hated them. I had real dysphoria and I couldn't feel them anyway. And it was almost like I was pushing the pin out through the other side, and you could see the point trying to break through the other side with such hate. And could I feel it? I couldn't feel a thing.
If I look at my past self, and particularly through photographs, one of the things that you'll notice is that I very rarely am smiling in photographs. Because I didn't feel comfortable in myself, smiling wasn't a natural thing, and smiling in front of a camera was... And I couldn't understand when I looked at pictures and thought, wow, look at that, they're smiling, how do they do that? How does that come naturally? Since transitioning, I find that if you look at the pictures of myself now, it's pretty much always smiling to some degree. If I can try and explain what it's like to be trans and living in the wrong gender, the way I describe it is it's like living in an invisible prison. So imagine that you're in a prison cell, a glass box that surrounds you, and you can see out and see the real world there, and you can see the people that you belong to and the people that you don't belong to, and you know that they don't have that glass box around them. They don't have that prison that's holding them. But because I'm in this prison, I have to pretend, I have to follow the rules, and I have to get up in the morning and put on a uniform. It's the prison uniform, the male uniform. I have to pretend to be things that don't come naturally. I have to learn to do things that don't come naturally. Because that's what the big wide world out there that can't see it thinks that I should be. It's hugely demanding from a mental standpoint. And as a result, you struggle. That's why people get depression, because you're spending so much time trying to be something that you're not, trying to learn, trying to repeat, trying to filter. That's why you do the self-harm, because you hate yourself, because you're in this prison and you can't get out of it and you can't escape from it. When you transition and you suddenly become yourself, and you let go of all of that, and you can just be. you can smile.
Gender dysphoria and body dysmorphia, I think our opponents, our enemies, try and reduce it and say it's just our feelings, get over it, deal with it. But it's not, because it's an integral part of who we are within society, within relationships, within a marriage, within work. And there is such a dissonance, such a distress, such an inner distress, a mental torment, that everything is wrong, everything's out of kilter. I felt that I was living a lie, that I was being totally dishonest to the people I loved most, that I was hiding who I was. And in the end, I think the pain of that is so great that you have to act on it, you have to deal with it. I tried for 50 years to deny who I was and deal with that through being workaholic, perfectionist, obsessive, driven, competitive, by using, in my earlier years, drugs and alcohol to mask. But in the end, who we are will always come out. It's natural to us, and it's unnatural to deny and suppress personality. And in the end, it will break out, or it will break down. I had a breakdown which led to me drinking 2 bottles of wine regularly, getting in the car to kill myself in a way that wouldn't look like a suicide, because I didn't want to hurt my family. And if it looked like an accident, then it would be more manageable for them. But the fact that I was drinking 2 bottles of wine and getting in the car led me to a point of realising that actually it wasn't me that I could end up killing, but I could end up killing somebody else's child, wife, husband. And that's what brought me to my senses and made me take myself to task and say, I have to deal with this. I have to stop denying who I am. I have to be honest with the world.
I remember when I had my birth certificate given to me in my male name. It almost said, yes, you're allowed to be alive, and you're allowed to be who you are. I think it's very important to have documentation of who you are in the gender that you want to be. It's an acknowledgement to yourself and to society.
So the Gender Recognition Act was created to enable people like myself to change their birth certificate. And the way that it was constructed was, it was written in such a way as to only apply to people who essentially had been through a transition process. So only those people who had been through transition had all the requisite requirements, and therefore supposedly received the rights of the relevant gender, in this case, in my case, female. What does that mean? It means I get to have maternity leave. This is my deed poll, which gives me my name change, and here's a letter from my doctor to say that I am changing gender. I'm going through a reassignment, and that this change is going to be permanent. Now, with those 2 documents, I can get my passport changed, my driving license changed, all these other documents, my registration for my land ownership, my company directorships, every other aspect of my life. I need those 2 documents to change my identity and to change my gender to female. That's it. So I've had my passport a long time before I had this. My gender recognition certificate and my birth certificate. Just those 2 documents. When this was created, at the time there was a belief that one could choose to be transgender. There was a belief that one could be coerced into being transgender, and that people might apply for this gender change for invalid reasons. So this was put together to try and put some barriers in the way to make sure that this wasn't granted incorrectly. Also, at the time that this was put together, you couldn't, for example, marry. So you didn't have same-sex marriage, you didn't have the same equality laws that we do now, we didn't have the same data protection laws that we do now. So this was much more important at the time. You know, if you just took out some of this stuff, you've still got a whole stack of stuff that you need to fill in and complete to do it that acts as a barrier. So I don't think it's prejudice, it was just that at the time it was a process that fitted with the understanding and also the value that this had. But that value has been diminished by equalisation of rights. It's now done past its sell-by date and it needs a little bit of updating, really.
Is a full transition something that you would like to do?
That is such a painful question. When I broke down at the age of 55 and accepted that I was transgender, for 3 years I cried almost continually with relief, with shock and with distress that I'd never been able to live as myself, and the only way forward I could see was transition. And yet that could cost me my family, and I didn't know how I could survive, and so I wrestled for a long time and came to a place of peace and said, okay, I will only transition if my family will enter with me in that transition, which was the biggest sacrifice I've ever made. And I long to transition, but in the current circumstances I don't know whether I ever will. That's partly the state of the NHS, personal finances, and age. I think every society has the choice to re-examine their fears and phobias, their prejudices against trans people, which nearly every society, every Western culture has. But I would hope that any trans kid born in 10, 20, 30 years time will not have to go through the hell that I went through and that we went through, because society will have learned to accept.
There was a palliative care nurse in Australia who recorded the dying wishes of all the regrets of the dying in her care over quite a substantial period of time. And while most people would say, well, it's probably going to be bungee, I wish I'd done bungee jumping, or I wish I'd done that and earned my millions, or whatever, it wasn't. The biggest regret people had was, I wish I'd been true to myself and done the things that were true to me, not what others expected of me. That's the biggest regret of people dying. Trans people have to face up to that and are true to themselves. That's kind of a neat thing. I think that deserves a little bit of respect, and it's very difficult to go through. It's probably the most challenging, scary, emotionally painful and physically painful thing one could go through. But we put ourselves through it, true to ourselves, and come out the other side, a little bit scarred, but generally pretty awesome, I reckon.
We need to be seen not as an anomaly, we need to be seen as human beings, as people that are living, that are more than our gender, more than our sex, that have feelings. That actually, in a way, by being transgender, we're a gift, because we can see what gender is, we can see what sex is, we can see what sexuality is. We know we've had to explore. What are you? Who are you? Where have you come from? What are you going to be? And to take you back to nothing, absolute nothing, to start to build yourself from the roots, takes guts, takes determination, but it gives you insight into what life is.
The dread that we have of coming out if we're transgender and nobody knows, can be crippling, can be crushing. And yet, to come out is actually to step into freedom, it's to step into peace, it's to step into joy. It's to step into a new life of peace, really. That's what I would say to anybody who is, or feels or fears that they're trans and has never acknowledged that. That finally you come home. You come home and you are the person that you're always meant to be and always were. And that is so good.